I wanted to talk about a few different things about working as a creative professional, and but more specifically about this idea of how that relates to your life, and how being a creative professional can also maybe undermine your own creative urges. And so this all started from a line of thinking about this saying of "only tourists look up," which I believe was from New York, and New York folks who are kind of grizzled and tired of their city, and kind of like to make fun of the rubes that come and are looking up at all the big buildings and skyscrapers and are awestruck by the city, and just kind of this callous sentiment of almost like a mockery of curiosity, which I started thinking about, and didn't really like that idea. I'm going to have to refer to my notes a little bit every once in a while, forgive me, but I started thinking about it as more of this idea that's contrary to what I see as being really vital to being creative, and what I guess I'm starting to articulate as more of what my worldview is, of this idea of being aware of your everyday patterns and being able to find beauty within that, and not getting grayed out by the things that you have to constantly, that you're doing. And so it's about also having the capacity to remain curious and inspired within that pattern. And so we all live in this connected world where we're constantly inundated by media and technology and emails and texts, and I mean, everyone here is probably carrying at least one device that they use to have inane conversations with their friends about pets and the food that they ate for lunch, and where they are right at that instant, and what they're doing at every moment of the day. And I started thinking about this idea and how being connected always was a pattern that I had, that I was always feeling like I had to be available, and that started to take over how I was living my life, and it made me start to wonder, well, what else is there outside of work? Because we have these patterns, and there's patterns and habits that everybody has in their lives, and people don't tend to examine their own patterns as something that they maybe made for themselves, and they tend to accept it as something that is, like, I have a job, that's what I do, so that's the end of that discussion a lot of times for people's minds. And you go there, and I think it's important to being aware of these patterns and habits and your daily routines, and what you're doing. And we're surrounded by these patterns all the time, and with brands are great examples of patterns or application of patterns of, you know, a certain type of behavior of that, you know, the entity is using to kind of relate to you as an individual within the pattern of your own life. And so, sorry, I got sidetracked there. I don't actually want to be talking about brands, but that's part of why I'm doing this talk. Is this whole thing is like is a result of me asking these questions of myself and realizing that I have a really hard time separating work from my life because of the nature of my work and the way I think about it, and it just overlaps all of these ideas in a way that can be really confusing. And I have a feeling, although I haven't talked to too many people about this, that I'm not alone in this, and that probably a lot of creative people go through this similar process. And part of what leads them to this work is even just this idea of how it overlaps and the way that it relates to everything that you do. And so, but anyways, so I started realizing that I was connected to work all the time. And it was leading me to question my ideas about what work means to me and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and what I'm trying to accomplish. And you know, work started to become all-encompassing. I worked for myself for a long time. And if you've done that and are self-employed or an entrepreneur, or an artist or someone that's passionate about their work, you put your all into it, and it consumes you, and that can be really exciting and fun, but it also makes you start to maybe lose track of other things in your life that may be important to you, like family or outside interests and friends in your social life and hobbies if you have them outside of work. And so I started thinking about it and trying to disconnect and not be as available in like very scheduled and regimented times. And I started realizing that I felt better when I didn't work all the time and that I was more inspired. And so I started examining my own patterns. And so here I started thinking about it and like, okay, well, I tend to go to sleep about midnight if I'm lucky, wake up at a little after 6, have some time in the morning before I commute to work, then I'm at work, then I eat lunch. And if anyone here has had lunch with me, you've probably heard me talk about how important lunch is a part of my day that I get to spend with friends and be out in the city, because as you can see from this pattern, I don't have very many other opportunities to be in the world and be social. I could probably more effectively have coded these as more family time, and this is like my one window of personal time in here. But so lunch is a big deal for me, and I always go out to lunch, even though it's a colossal waste of money. And I'm always trying to wrangle my friends to go with me, and they resent me for wasting their money as well. But I feel like it's really important. It may not be as important to everybody else as it is to me. But so then I started thinking, okay, well, I blocked that out, and this is what a typical week looks like, and it starts flatlining a little bit, and then a typical month to a typical year, and you can see, oh, we've got a little holiday break and a holiday here. That's pretty awesome. And then, get a second to load up there, a typical career of 30 years. And so, when I really started seeing this, I started to freak out a little bit. And I realized that when I was younger, I was really, well, from my introduction, you heard there's a few different paths that I had taken, which in retrospect, I wouldn't say was a waste of time and that I got a lot of valuable experience from it, but there was a point in my life where I had an epiphany about what I wanted to do or pursue, in a wholehearted way, and that was design. And I started seeing it. I was always interested in the arts. I went to school to be a fine artist and realized that I didn't have anything really to contribute to that world, and then got pretty wholeheartedly distracted by music for a while, and it was fun. But when I discovered design, I poured myself into it, and then I taught myself how to do it. I didn't go to school for it, and so then I just felt like I had to make up for lost time, and I was just pouring everything I had in it to become my idea of what a designer was. And to do that, I had to dedicate myself to it entirely. And so now, in retrospect, and thinking about this, it's this idea of this difference between becoming and being, and the energy and the pattern that I created for myself in becoming the designer I wanted to be may not be sustainable as being a designer in the long term of this. And so I'm having to really restructure the way that I think about my approach to work and what I want to get out of it and how I want to live my life. So this pattern is common and is very specifically marketed towards Ferraris and piles of cocaine. So I figured this is probably not the path for me. As fun as that might be, I don't think that's sustainable either. And so it's leading me to this other idea of hunting and gathering, and the pattern of work in that other way I've referred to it in my notes here. It's a pattern trap. It's this idea of you're working to get somewhere, you accomplish it, and then you're in it, and then what do you do beyond that? And patterns, as designers, we know can be beautiful and to look at, and exciting to put together or fun, but they can also be, in the context of branding, if you're thinking about it as like style guides or your rules about logo size and relationships of type and what you can and can't do, they can also become very confining and restricting. Well, they can also become boring in their repetition, which in the context of your own life is a real tragedy that you probably want to avoid. But there's this idea of work and that being a pattern, but then this difference of being hunters and gatherers versus consumers. And so this relates back to the idea of the connected world and iPads and iPhones, and always being engaged in this way where you're not necessarily observing what's around you, but you could be also become a little bit complacent, or you start to expect to be serviced. And in relation to work, you've got a job and you expect to get your work, and you work at a certain pace and everything's provided for you, or you're entertained from outside sources and you stop having the capacity to entertain yourself or be interested in things or discover things or looking around you. And this starts feeling really dangerous to me. And as an individual, when I start feeling static in this way, I really start getting aggravated and agitated and want to get out of my skin, or I just start freaking out a little bit. And this happens in macro and micro scale. It can happen within the context of a day or within months of something. I can, depending on my mood, I can really obsess on the moment and how that moment is making me crazy because it's exactly like so many other moments. Or if I start blowing that, again, depending on my mood, blowing that out into that big picture, I can really start getting nihilistic, and it's not healthy. But so having your work provided for you, or your entertainment, or all of these ideas, and coming to expect that to be delivered to you, that's one of the things that I see as being a danger, is having expectations. And because I think that expectations lead to disappointment and then to resentment, whether that's in the context of your relationship that you have with your significant other, or your boss, or the company that you work for, or your friends and you're playing in a band with, or your person that's spotting you at the gym. You know, I mean, it's anything like that. That pattern, I think, is really dangerous. And then just this idea of complacency can lead to boredom, and boredom can lead to atrophy, and I think that's really dangerous as well. So there's this idea of hunting and gathering, and that there's this difference of the approach of how you go into your day, of especially in relation to what inspires you as a creative individual. And if you're in the workplace and you have a job and these things are provided for you, you can get that mixed up in this idea of being expecting to have your inspiration as a creative person to be provided for you as well. And I have found that rarely works, and that you really have to rely on yourself to pursue your interests. So, what do we do? What do we do when we're doing what we love, when we do what we love all the time? But does that make it possible for us to continue doing what we love in a way that is healthy? We have to do ourselves a favor of examining our motives and our priorities about what leads us to doing this work, why we're doing it in the first place, and are we in a situation that ultimately feeds that yourself. And so priorities and motives are different ideas for me, and I have a few examples, and they're different for everybody, obviously. And it's hard to ask yourself these questions a lot of times and really be honest about what you're doing, because there's a lot of things that kind of confuse these ideas and get them muddled together, as far as commoditizing what yourself is about in doing what you're passionate about. I feel like, the reason this is relative to creative people, I think, or relevant, in contrast to like manufacturing jobs or things that I have avoided in my life, I feel like we're lucky to be doing what we love to do. And so, but then because we're also doing it for a living, it can really confuse these ideas. And so I feel like I need to really question. I need to drink water for a second here. So there's this difference also within motives of the ideas of need, enjoy, and want. And those are like questions you have to ask yourself about anything that you're doing. Do I need this? Do I want this? Or do I enjoy it? Like, if you're enjoying it, then you don't necessarily need it or want it. But usually something needs to be coming out of that. And then there's these different motivators of things like money, obviously is a huge motivator. And then, so you have to ask yourself, what do I need money for? How much do I actually need? Which is something that I tend to, it's like my default motivator of saying, I'm the sole provider of my family, I have to have money. So, I've got to do this because I have to earn money. But then I've never been honest with myself about how much money I actually need to live the lifestyle that I want. And so then there's never a cap. There's never this line that I get to draw of saying, now I'm working enough because I'm providing in the way that I need to. So I'm always like on the prowl to like make money. But then the trap in that is that I actually don't really like money very much or care about it, and it doesn't satisfy me. But so then other motivators, is it fame? To what end? What does it bring you? Does it being famous make your work better? Is your priority being famous, or is it doing good work? Is it power? Over whom? Is it you want to be a boss, or do you want to run Apple or the world, or what's your idea of what you're trying to do with that? And then. Similar to that, is it recognition, from whom? Is it your peers? Is it your dad? Is it the nation? What kind of recognition are you looking for? And then also ego, of course, is big, but can you always be better than everybody else? Or is it an inferiority complex? And then if you have to ask yourself, will you ever allow yourself to be good enough? And you have to examine those questions and really think about what the answers are to you in a real way. But then there's also cultural priorities, and this relates back to money again, in that our society has kind of dictated priorities in a certain way. And as creatives, does this imposed structure ultimately feed our creative selves? And that, again, this commodity, are treating ourselves as a commodity, is it bringing value to your life to be doing any of these things? Is it worth it? Does it make you happy? Does it fuel you ultimately, and what moves you forward in your work? So that leads me to this idea of the economy of the self, and that your creative soul or gift or whatever it is that you want to call it is a precious natural resource that you can either exploit or nurture and sustain through your career. And this is especially important if you rely on your creative self as your source of income. And so I'm hesitant to think about, I think then there's a marketing angle on that of the sales pitch of all of the things, the tricks that you can do to keep you performing at maximum output at all times, but I just don't think that that's right, and that you need to recognize your outside life. And I'm saying you, but I'm actually talking about myself. This whole thing is public therapy for myself. But I need to recognize. I'll just change it. I'll just talk about myself. I need to recognize that my life is a part of this overarching pattern, and that work is just one section of that. And part of what this is a realization of almost like a switch in strategy, as far as like the short game of becoming versus the long game of being, and that I need to have the resources and the strength to endure the entire duration of this idea. So, the importance of variation in pattern. So, there's this idea of being connected, and that it can ultimately be removing you from what it is that inspires you. But does the pattern of your work allow you to pursue your own personal interests and allow you to be a bigger person than just what you do in your office during the day? But that idea of outside of that context of those things outside of your work are probably what also makes your work better. And so, we all talk about the creative process, and we talk about what it takes to make something, but are we actually being honest about the full cycle of that creative process, which in my personal cycle is a lot of ups and downs, and which can happen for different reasons. Maybe exhaustion is one of them. But if I'm working on a project for a long time, there's a big push, and it's a lot of ideas, a lot of energy going into it, and then I've finished that project, if anything can ever be finished, then there's like the inevitable crash afterwards of feeling dejected or like a failure ultimately, and needing to, being frustrated or restless about what's coming up next. I tend to try to solve that problem by doing more work, but I probably should reflect on that more as a time of saying, okay, this is a part of my natural cycle. I should embrace this. I should do the things that ultimately fuel me to be inspired to attack the next project in a way that leads to good results. And so, you have to ask yourself what that is. Is it research, education, exploration, travel, downtime, sports or activities? Like, what are those things? And this, forgive me if this seems super obvious to everybody. I don't know why this has been so difficult for me to figure out. But part of your job, or my job, is creating opportunities for myself to vary my pattern. And doing this talk even is that. It gave me a chance to break out of my normal routine, to think about something in a different way and try to put it together. And it's been really exciting and fun to think about. And so just, are there things that you can do to like switch things up and give yourself the opportunity to recharge? So, in conclusion, success comes in many forms, and it may not be quite what a lot of people, like what that society dictates as being success, in a way that you can evaluate, is that what you're ultimately trying to accomplish? Does your workflow and creative process harmonize with expectations of the professional world in a 9-to-5 schedule? Are your peak hours from 4 to 8 o'clock? Is there a way that you can structure your day to maximize that, instead of starting at 9 and dragging it out and then working an extra 4 hours? And you use those first 4 hours in the day to do something else that makes it better for you to be there and make it so you don't feel like you're static and wasting your time. The definition of success will change over the course of your life. I mapped out 30 years, and if I were to do the same thing every day, obviously that would be maddening, but my expectations of what I'm trying to do in a day is changing. And so just being aware of that pattern and asking those questions about what I'm trying to do and how I want to relate to my life, and trying to avoid a situation where, in order for me to change my pattern, it's a massive, catastrophic, tectonic shift, as opposed to subtle movements that make it easier on yourself and everyone around you. And then there is no perfect job. Like, this is something that I have to know, that you have to, no one's going to hand this to me. I have to create it. I have to make my work what I need it to be, and figure out how to really pull it together and avoid those traps of complacency and atrophy. And so I just I can't stress that enough, I guess, is the point of this, is like just really examining your own patterns and empowering yourself to change them if you need to. And I guess I ultimately, I lost that last little section of my notes there, and I totally derailed myself. But anyways, basically, the end of the thing is, just force yourself to be curious within the context of your own life, and to not take it for granted and get bored with it, because it's nobody's fault but your own. And again, I'm talking to myself. And go out and make it what you want it to be, and enjoy it while it lasts. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but if you do, let it rip. Or enjoy the donuts.
I'm not talking. I'm a student, and so I haven't hit a midlife crisis quite yet.
It's coming.
Just wondering if you have any early start words of wisdom.
Well, yeah, I guess, there's a reason that you're doing what you're doing, that you're studying what it is, whatever it is. And one thing is to not lose sight of what that initial inspiration is, or what it is that you're passionate about, that makes you want to pursue it. And then as you're moving forward, just be asking yourself the questions: is what I'm doing ultimately satisfying me on that level, or is it taking me further away from it, or is it taking what I love to do and making it mundane? And do you want to allow that to happen? And then, that's the thing with this that's complicated, and is that those ideas can really blur together. And there are reasons why you, at times in your life, where you can accept compromise for different reasons, or you want to push in different directions. And I think, like I was saying, like this beginning for me, whereas when I poured myself into it, I created a situation that then other things in my life changed. Like specifically, I had kids, and that was like this massive shift in my priorities. It didn't allow me to pursue my work in the same way, and so they became at odds with each other. And so it's just trying to be, even just for me, putting these ideas in the context of it being a pattern has helped me to be able to identify them and think about these ideas almost as categories of things that I can focus on. And it's been really helpful. But just thinking about why you're doing what you're doing, and if what you're doing is delivering on that. And if you're able to say yes the majority of the time, then maybe you can avoid some of the pitfalls of Ferraris and cocaine. Yeah.
So, like your predictive model for your 30 years
Mm-hmm.
pattern. So what would that look like? Like, have you made one? That's like that's worst case scenario.
That's if I was to continue today's thing, it would be pretty intense.
How do you see it changing?
That's an excellent question. And is part of like this whole thing is like my process of trying to figure that out. And I think that there's part of this is me asking myself, well, what do I want out of my life? What is it that I want to do that everybody always is saying, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time for this, or I'm so busy, I don't have time for that, and I'm saying this all the time, like there's all these things, oh, I can't do that, I've got too much work to do, or I got to rush to my next thing, or whatever. And, this idea of saying I don't have time for this or that has been something that I've really been thinking about a lot, and I'm realizing, well, the only thing I really have in this world is time. And what I have to decide is how I want to spend that. And so what gets hard for me is that I love doing this work, and I want to do it, and I'm compelled to do it. And so what's fun for me is figuring out brands for whatever, or designing logos, or thinking of strategies of how to create a visual language that relates to an idea. But I can't do it all the time. And then I also like doing things like going on bike rides with my friends or going camping with my family. And those things make me feel better. And so I'm at odds with myself always of if left to my own devices, I would destroy myself by working forever. But luckily, I have my family to remind me that that's a bad idea. And so I guess what would be different, would just be a flexibility of when and how I can work. And so I am yet to figure out how to really make that work. And that's where I am having to evaluate it within the context of like society's priorities of trying to help me figure out like, well, how much money do I need? Do I need a data plan for my phone and Netflix and internet and all of these things that I've told myself I need money for to be able to live in the way that I want to live? But then if I'm working all the time, I don't have an opportunity to do any of the things that I'm saying I want to spend money on, so, or go anywhere to travel or go on vacation or, so what I'm trying to figure out is what it is that I actually need, both out of work and out of my life, and then figure out how to redesign that graph of my trajectory. I don't have a good answer yet. Yeah.
What are you currently doing to hunt them together for inspiration?
Cycling has become a really great thing for me to focus on. And when I discovered it, I felt really lucky because it was the first thing I was interested in outside of work that could compete with it. And so, although I find ways to relate that to work as well, in that one of the reasons I like cycling is because of a lot of the design sensibility of it and certain brands that really do that well, and I try to learn from them what I can. But so trying to read books that aren't related to work, trying to find opportunities to have more time with friends, which my social relationships have really suffered over the last 10 years, to the point where it's hard for me to like go hang out and drink. Like I know that there are people in this world that are like, yeah, let's go hang out at the bar, and they like watch movies and stuff, and it's like, how do you do this, So, which I used to be able to do. I used to really enjoy hanging around, doing nothing, drinking beers with my friends, and I don't do that anymore, So it's just like, how do I get back to some of these other things that make me feel like I have a life outside of my work, and but then it's like carving that time. It's again that idea of time, just forcing myself to do something else. And so whenever I do that, I feel better, but it's hard to find that time. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
So I really love the talk. It's really
Well, as a result of a lot of this thinking, I've lost a lot of interest in Facebook and Twitter and blogs, like trying to maintain these ideas myself. Because I think that Twitter, a lot of these things, like, all reveal people's patterns so transparently. Of, I feel like I can open up Facebook and go through the thing, and it could be 3 years ago, could be the exact same thing of here's where someone ate lunch, here's the music someone's listening to, here's the ironic complaint that someone's got to make, here's all of these different things that people use them for, and it blurs, because then there's people that you follow who are posting things that that you are interested in, and so that's part of this idea is being able to sift through your influx of information in a way that is relevant to you. And part of so as a reaction to this, I rarely use those things unless I feel like I have something really relevant to say. To not be, I think something is really funny. That's one of my things. I'll try to write something on Twitter that I think is funny. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, but just throw that out into the world whenever I can. But my interest in that is waned. In that, I don't necessarily also want to inundate all of these people who are following me with totally irrelevant things. I mean, the example of the iPad that's in front of my son is like, I just found the image of the iPad online. It's like intentionally stupid of, I know you love kittens and there's these kittens in here, but like that was the kind of thing where it's like I'm compelled to be connected all the time, and a huge amount of things that I'm sifting through are completely worthless. And so, this ties into hunting and gathering as well, in that as opposed to sitting there and having information pushed on me, I'm trying to be more purposeful with what I'm seeking out and what I'm connecting with to try to get what I want out of the experience, as opposed to feeling like I am bogged down by a huge amount of information that I don't need. I don't know if I completely answered your question.
So it sounds like you don't use Twitter or Facebook, and you really connect with your friends via like phone and just in-person conversations, and like do a lot of business that way as well. I mean,
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I do use them. I look at it sometimes, but a part of my thing with this is, in the compression of time in my day, of how valuable my time is to myself, I feel like there's more effective ways for me to communicate with the people that are important to me in a more immediate way. And I feel like a lot of things with Twitter and Facebook is like, yeah, it's a great way to push content, but you're kind of just throwing stuff out into a void. You can consume it in an edited way, but it's, as far as like putting myself out, I don't necessarily feel like it's the most effective way for me to communicate. Not to say that I don't enjoy it. I mean, I see people, Facebook's been a great way for me to actually reconnect with friends that I hadn't seen for a long time, or to get in touch with things, but I prefer to do things in a more immediate and personal way. Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to that. So I really like this idea of being able to filter out the noise, kind of find like that sweet spot between priority and motives, using hunting and gathering tools. There's a lot of noise out there. And
No, I mean, there's a level of it that's trying to filter my things that I guess part of it is like trying to filter what I feel compelled to respond to or deal with or digest. And so I guess, filtering information is kind of a side effect of me trying harder to focus on being grounded in myself and really knowing what I'm trying to do in a clear way that then helps me to define what's important to me outside of that. And because I feel like while a lot of that information can be valuable, it's maybe not time pressing or time sensitive or super relevant. I mean, everything's interesting, or relatively interesting. That's I have to be careful about that. But I think the real thing for me is recognize, and I'm not trying to demonize Twitter and Facebook and iPads and iPhones and all of these devices and email, and I saw it as a pattern of creating a situation where I felt like I had to be working all the time, and that if I wasn't working, I felt bad about myself, and that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. And so, and it made me lose sight of these larger ideas and these goals for myself. And so that's where recognizing that allowed me to start looking at it differently as far as how much access I gave it to my life. Yeah.
My husband and I have conversations similar to this, and I guess one thing I'm wondering is, have you and your wife found a good way to kind of encourage each other to break out of the feeling of duty as a parent or routine as being parents, to pursue your own goals and personal development?
I would say that I'm a terrible example of success at these ideas. But it's something that my wife and I talk about a lot, and it's something, and she's actually going through a very similar process, but for different motivations and to accomplish some different ideas. But a lot of it are rooted in the same ideas, so we have conversations about it. And this is where some of this is even just, like I was saying, is just the acknowledgement of this as a pattern and then examining it and figuring it out. And I feel like we're in the process of doing that, and really we've been taking steps in our lives to try to more authentically live the life that we want to create for ourselves and our children. And what's hard about it is that it's a constantly moving target, in that our careers are always changing or evolving. Our kids are growing up. We just moved. Things are always moving around in this way where it's hard to have that clarity where you can make black or white decisions. But it's something that we're trying to be really aware of, and to be working together to be helping each other define these ideas about ourselves, but also what we're trying to do as a family, and then figure out how to make that work. So we talk about it a lot, but to mixed degrees of success. Yeah.
I like how you were talking about, like how to be wary of just waiting for things to come to you all the time, and always, in terms of media, always being entertained, always being, marketed to, and then always at work, having projects being given to you. And I think it was like James Victore saying, his designer saying something like, don't wait for projects to come to you, create the project that you want, but figure out what matters to you,
Mm-hmm.
what you have a position on, create it, and then find the client.
Mm-hmm.
Find a way
Right.
produce with clarity what you want instead of it's in reaction to outside stuff coming in.
Right. Well, I think that that's really difficult. I think that that's great if you can do it. And I think it's a hard thing to do if you're working not for yourself. It's a hard thing to do if you are working for yourself, especially because that then shifts the priority of money and what you, like if you need money and you're working for yourself and you're your only source of income and someone brings a job to you or if someone approaches you about doing work for them and you're not really interested in it but you don't have a choice because you need to pay your mortgage, you kind of get in this tricky situation. No, I think there are people in this world who are able to do this, and they've been able to get to a point where they have some of these other motivations of fame or power or recognition that allows them to get the kind of work that they want to do, and they're able to take a stand on that. And I think the harder question is not like, yes, it's a hard question. What would you want to do? And if that was the only thing you did, like, how would you make that work? That's a very difficult thing to figure out. But it's not something that as many people have an opportunity to do because they're in a situation where they need to rely on outside support, you know, and that's where you need to be questioning these motives or what's motivating you. And you know, maybe you are working to get somewhere and you need, you know, experience and reputation to be able to get to that next step. And so then it's just evaluating, are you doing what you need to for that long-term goal? So some of that is having that long-term vision and then knowing, well, right now I need to work at a job that I don't necessarily like so much to be able to do this. And then when I do that, I'm going to get to this next step. But it's hard to have that clarity, especially when you get mired down in something in a way where you don't see outside of that. And then if you lose sight of that outside goal, then things like atrophy and boredom set in and you start doing less good work and then you don't end up getting the recognition that you want, or, you know, it can work against you.
Yeah, but then it's like 10 years later when you're like, what if I got good in the last 10 years?
Right.
Doing something that I don't want to do?
And that's part of, right, and that's part of what's important to me about seeing this as a pattern, is that it gives you an ability to get a little bit of foresight as far as where you're headed and what you're trying to do, and having an opportunity to define that pattern. And then it's easy to get lost along the way or to prioritize things at different points. But if you have the clarity to define your end goal, you know better what to be focusing on along the way. And so it's just helpful, I think. And if your end goal is, I want to make my own line of perfume, and, you know, great. How do you do that, you know, and just try to figure out how to do that. But if you're in a situation where you have to have a job, just be asking yourself, is it getting you where you want to go? And is it satisfying you ultimately in some way towards that end result? Sorry, Lucy's had her hand up in the back for a long time.
You talked about there are people who are successes at this. I want to know who are the people that you look to that have this life that you're aspiring to?
Well, there's classic examples of people like Paul Rand or Frank Lloyd Wright or now I'm drawing a blank on some of the names, but you know, the individuals that tend to be in the canon of design that you know, had opportunities to redefine the medium that they're working in, or, you know, Otto Leiker, who's living on his solar-powered farm in the countryside of Germany and designing the Munich Olympics. You know, it's like, yeah, that sounds pretty rad, but I'm not in a position to be able to do that, you know. So there are people that are able to do it, and but that's again like even identifying different levels of success or of what you're trying to get to and different ways that that can happen. Like I don't think I'm going to be able to be Paul Rand. I don't have the same design sensibility. I don't have the influence to shift corporations' thinking about how they consider design in relationship to their brand. No matter how much I try, I've been shown that I cannot change these things. So, so then, you know, I just have to be asking myself, well, what can I learn out of this experience in a different way and still be trying to get towards this other idea? Yeah.
So in this increasingly connected modern world, one of the problems I think is that the division between work and non-work is breaking down. So you're at dinner, you're done with your friends, and then you get a work email, and then all of a sudden you're at work for 5 minutes, and then you're done, and then you're not at work anymore. So there's kind of this staccato rhythm to when you are at work and not at work. So it seems like one of the natural ways to solve this problem is to reestablish those barriers and say things like, yeah, after 8 p.m. I just won't check work email. Is there another path to that, or is that the right thing to do?
I'm sure there are other paths. Right now, I haven't been able to think of another one. And so I'm trying to do what you're talking about. Like on weekends, I really try not to do any work unless there's some incredible thing that I just have to get done. But I will barely check email. I don't take my phone out of my bag. I just kind of consider myself unavailable. But creating barriers that are as simple as when I'm at the dinner table, I'm not going to be checking my email. That's a pretty simple thing to do. And you know, I can't tell you how many times I've been at lunch, which I was talking about how important that is to me as far as my social interaction in the world. And there's people that are like, you know, every 2 minutes distracted and doing something like, you know, really you don't have half an hour that you can not do this and we can have a conversation. I think establishing those barriers is really important, and it's a simple way to start getting there. As far as there being other ways to do it, I'm sure there are. It's bigger than just not always being connected. It's about structuring your life to have the time to do activities that fuel you in other ways, as opposed to just being inundated by things you can't, that distract you. But so that's a big part of it, is just also making those barriers, but structuring these other ideas, in identifying what it is you need to do in a different way, and then structuring that into your pattern. Yeah. Yeah. One more question. We have time for one more question. Anybody?
I really like what you said earlier about remembering, you know, what inspired you to become a designer. And you used to be very into music, and you have bands and everything. And I was wondering what fueled that transition. What made you want to become a designer? And then I guess the second part of the question is, do you see yourself going back? Like, do you miss that, or are you still involved in it?
I'm still involved in it, but I don't see myself going back in the way that I was involved. A lot of it is because I don't have the patience or time to be committed to that idea of, like, I love the idea of playing music, but the idea of sitting in a room and like trying to hash out an idea and then like going through the effort of trying to get live shows and packing up the van and moving, and like immediately I'm just like, no, thanks. I don't need to do that anymore. But what led me to design, I guess, was a realization in that I had been working my whole life. I've been, I guess, you know, had thought of myself as trying to move into this idea of being an artist. You know, I went to school to be an artist. I studied art, and like I was saying earlier, I realized I didn't necessarily have. I got to the point where I realized what real art was, and I didn't feel like that was what I was trying to do with my creative energy. It wasn't the right avenue for me. And then music kind of took over, but I was always doing stuff. You know, I was working on magazines with my friends or doing the artwork for my bands and other people's bands and a lot of, and this is all, you know, pre-computers in the sense that that's relevant, I guess, in a few ways of thinking like didn't have access necessarily to design in a way that now there's 10,000 blogs about design and you can go and spend 2 years looking at all of this stuff. And so I didn't really know about it. And especially in the context of, or I had a very rudimentary understanding of what it was. And I've thought of myself more as an artist, and I was like, I don't really want to do this in this certain way. But all of the artwork that I was doing was combining images and type and was geared around this idea of people making connections, being able to manipulate those connections through presenting people with ideas of words and images. And suddenly I kind of realized, and it was through the band, actually, of doing the work and always kind of approaching those projects as more of an artist. And I'm gesturing over here to Jesse Ledoux sitting up here and his coworker, Jeff Kleinsmith. In the process of doing artwork for the bands, I would go in and I would meet with Jeff to have him, you know, help me put together the stuff. And I saw what he was doing, and I was like, oh my God, there it is. That's what it is I'm trying to do. That's the way that I can combine all of these ideas and make it work. And that branding is an extension of this idea of what I was trying to accomplish through my artwork. And I'm more interested in design than I am in art. Even though I love art, I couldn't necessarily it wasn't the right voice for what I was trying to do. And so but I had never seen design or a designer or someone applying those ideas. And so it was like, oh, okay, I want to do that. And that's when I just started reading as many books as I could get my hands on. And I mean, had seen a lot of it in a way, but just like pursuing it and studying it started from there, I guess. So, all right, thank you.